Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I'm going to tell you how to read ahead in the story of Mushoku Tensei if you've been loving the anime series and don't want to wait until the next season of the anime for more once it ends. Because at the time I'm recording this, we have just 2 episodes left to go. I'm going to be talking about your options for continuing the story in English, as well as about some important side stories and prequels that you can also read, including when to read those to get the most out of them without spoiling anything in the main story. If you like content about Mushoku Tensei, please consider hitting the subscribe button, as I make regular videos about the series as well as other anime content. Subscribing to my channel really helps me out, so I really appreciate it if you do. And with that out of the way, let's talk about reading ahead in Mushoku Tensei. The reason why it isn't necessarily obvious how to continue the story is that there are 3 different formats, and that's not including the anime. There is the web novel, which was the original story Rifujin Namaganote wrote and published for free in Japanese. There is the official light novel version, which is kind of the refined second draft of the story, and then there's the manga adaptation. All of these have been translated to varying degrees, and so it's not as simple as with some anime, where you can just pick up a translation of the manga it's based on and keep going, without really needing to consider anything else. It's important to know this when deciding which version to read, because where a lot of anime are based on manga, and a manga version of Mushoku Tensei exists, some people assume that the manga is the original source material. In fact, the manga version is another adaptation, just like the anime, and is nowhere near as far ahead in the story as the light novels and web novel. So, with the 3 different formats, it's best to consider the web novel a kind of first draft of the story, the light novels the final polished version, and the manga and anime different adaptations of that final version. As you might expect then, the web novel is the one that's furthest ahead. In fact, it's actually finished, and has been since about 2015. It was started in 2012, and the author actually wrote the entire story in about 2 years. This sounds intense, but it's not that unusual for a web novel. Many of the anime we see, especially when it comes to certain genres popular in light novels, such as isekai and magic school series, started out in this way, including Re:Zero and Rising of the Shield Hero. The authors write and post the web novels, often at a rate of a chapter a day, and then those that are successful and gain traction in Japan get picked up by publishers for light novel releases. And then, if those are successful, they can get anime and manga adaptations. The Mushoku Tensei web novel has been fully translated into English by fans, and there are various formats you can read these translations in, including PDF files if you want to read them on an e-reader device or even on your phone. There are various sites that have translations for the Mushoku Tensei web novel, and I've put a link to one place that has them in the PDF format in the description. And there you can also find all of the side content I'll be talking about here too, plus some other short side stories. But if you don't want PDFs, you can also find other sites to read it on if you want to read it online through your browser, and you can find these easily enough with a quick Google search. Now, since the web novel itself is free, and the English translations are unofficial fan translations that are also made available for free, this is not only the only way to read to the end of the story in English at present, as well as to read a lot of the side content, but it's also a legal way to read Mushoku Tensei for free without any piracy being involved. However, because these are fan translations, the translation quality does vary throughout the volumes. Most of it is very good in terms of translation, but volume 19 particularly sees a drop in translation quality, where I think there was a less experienced translator doing a lot of it. It is still readable, and the quality does go back up for the later volumes, but at the moment you do have to accept patchy translation quality to finish the web novel in English. So really, just remember that it was being done for free, both by the author and the translator. Now, while the web novel is the only way to get the complete story in English, I would still recommend either reading the official light novels as well, or doing what a lot of people do, and starting with the light novels, then switching to the web novel after you reach the point where English translations aren't available anymore. The light novel series is close to finishing in Japan, but the English versions of the books published by 7 Seas are only up to volume 14 at the time of making this video. The reason to read the light novels where translations are available, rather than reading the whole series in the web novel, is that not only do you get all the artwork and the consistent translations and support the author, but the light novel series actually adds quite a lot of content. The story as a whole is the same between the web novel and light novel, or at least so I'm told by people who've been able to read the light novels in Japanese. But in the process of redrafting the series for the light novel releases, the author added many extra details, and even apparently extra side characters. A good example of this, in the parts of the series that have already been officially translated to English, is Volume 7 of the light novels, which is actually the part that will come immediately after the end of the current anime season. Volume 7 is light novel only. Basically, the period that it covers was a time skip in the original web novel, and the author wrote the arc in Volume 7 to fill in what Rudeus was doing during that time. To most people who've read it, Volume 7 not only gives us an interesting story in its own right, but also gives a lot of character development for Rudeus, and so the series is definitely improved by having it. So, if you're going to read the light novels or web novel, where should you start? The anime is covering the first 6 volumes of the light novel, so you do have the option to go straight into the light novels after the season ends and start with Volume 7, if you are really keen to just press on with the next parts of the story straight away. But if you have the time and really want to get the most out of the series, I would still recommend starting from Volume 1 and reading the whole thing, because there are some things cut from the anime or changed from the light novels. I know though that a lot of people don't have time to do that, or don't really want to read the parts they've only just watched in the anime to get to what happens next. So I'm just saying that if you really don't want to start at the beginning, you'll be able to pretty much follow things going forward if you start with Volume 7. Then, whether you start from 1 or 7, you can read the light novels up to the end of Volume 14, or if you're watching this much later than it was originally uploaded, whichever volume was the last to be translated by 7 Seas, and then switch to the web novel to finish the story. You may well want to continue reading the light novel translations as they come out too, to get the extra stuff that will no doubt be included in them, but for now, this is probably the best way to read the full story in English. You can buy the light novels in digital or physical format from anywhere that sells books pretty much, including places like Amazon. If you're getting the light novels though, it is worth being aware that 7 Seas reissued some versions of the English light novel after there was some controversy about things that had been changed in the translation. Basically, they originally censored some scenes and did it in a way that effectively changed Rudy's character. For example, in the scene we saw in Season 1 of the anime, where Rudy gets tempted by seeing Eris asleep, in the initial English translation of the light novel, 7 Seas had him instead cover Eris up so she wouldn't get cold. People did complain about this when they realised, because fans generally don't want to think the translations they buy have been changed in those kinds of ways to suit Western sensibilities. To their credit, 7 Seas did reissue the novels without those liberties being taken in the translation, but if you happen to get your hands on an old copy, it might be one that has those changes. If you've already seen the anime, then you already know how Rudeus's character at the start was written, so reading these censored versions won't really change how you see him, but it's just something to know about. Also, as another note, the numbering of the web novel and light novel volumes is a bit different. So if you have read up to the end of Volume 14, you need to start with Volume 16 of the web novel. So that's really how to read the whole story using the light novels and web novel, but what about the manga? Well, the manga isn't really that well received as an adaptation by people who've read the different formats, as it does skip a lot of things and make some strange changes that aren't in the anime or the original novels. Really, the main reason to read the manga is if you just really don't like reading novels. If English is not your first language and the manga has been translated into the language you prefer, where the novels haven't, or perhaps to just try out the series and see if you find it interesting enough to get into the novels without committing too much time to it, as naturally the manga is a lot quicker to read. The other reason to read the manga would just be that you've already read the novels and just want to see how it was done as a manga, as well as to read the funny manga-only extras. But really, where this isn't a manga original story, the manga doesn't really offer the definitive experience with the series. The manga is published monthly in the Japanese publication Monthly Comic Flapper. Yes, Flapper. The L there is very important. It is licensed in English by 7 Seas, so there is an official English version of the manga volumes. But if you're used to reading manga online, you'll probably appreciate that translations of the latest Japanese chapters do come out online long before the official English releases. Naturally, I can't promote that kind of thing on YouTube, but Google is your friend if you want to read fan translations of the manga chapters. The Mushoku Tensei manga is currently somewhere near to the end of volume 9 of the light novels, in terms of where the story is up to. So while it is ahead of the anime, it's only ahead by about half a season. You would then need to switch to the light novels, the web novel, or both to continue if you don't want to wait for a new chapter each month to finish the story. While we're on the topic of the Mushoku Tensei manga though, there is a manga-only spin-off series about Roxy, which is called Roxy Gets Serious, and which started in 2017 and is currently ongoing. I haven't actually read that myself yet, so I can't tell you too much about it, but it does take place before the events of Mushoku Tensei, and doesn't seem to spoil any revelations from the main story, other than Roxy's backstory of leaving her tribe and studying magic, which you'll already know about if you've seen the anime. So it seems to be a spin-off you can read wherever you're up to in the Mushoku Tensei series. Now, talking of side content, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of side stories out there that fit into Mushoku Tensei's canon. Many of them are short bonus stories, of the type that get given away to customers when someone buys a light novel from a particular chain of shops in Japan. And while you can find some of these translated, and they are fun to read, they're not an essential part of the series. However, there are a few notable longer side stories from the web novel which you will probably want to read to get the full story, and which are fully translated. The first one of these is a series of stories known as Redundancy. This is a collection of stories that take place in the years after the climax of Mushoku Tensei and show what different characters are getting up to. Some of them are romance stories, showing who some characters end up marrying. Some are more comedic, slice-of-life type stories, and others are more emotional, sentimental types of stories about people from the cast growing up. Naturally, this means you want to wait until after the main story to read it, so you know who everyone is and which story threads it's tying up, as well as to avoid spoilers. Redundancy is the series that included a controversial story regarding the character Aisha that was deleted by the author. I do have a whole video talking about this chapter, why the author deleted it, and where it stands in terms of canon, if you want to know the full details around that. Now, most translations you will find do include the deleted chapters, and personally I would say that unless you know you're going to have a strong bad reaction to them, it's better to actually read them, but that's something you can decide for yourself when you get there. Then there is Jobless Oblige, which takes place in a similar time frame to the Redundancy stories and is the story of one character who's born during Mushoku Tensei and what they end up doing as they grow up. I'm not going to say who the character is because, as I said, they haven't been born yet where the anime is up to, and I don't want to spoil anything in this video. Probably the ideal reading order for Redundancy and Jobless Oblige is to start Redundancy after you finish Mushoku Tensei and read it through to the end of a story called Nanahoshi Gourmet. After that, read Jobless Oblige and then go back and read the final story in Redundancy, which is called The Last One to Leave the Nest. You don't have to do it that way. You can read Jobless Oblige after all of Redundancy, which is what I did, but this order would probably be the most satisfying way to finish the story. The other important side story is called Old Dragon's Tale, and it's a prequel to Mushoku Tensei set thousands of years before Rudeus is reincarnated, and it focuses on Laplace. Now, while it is a prequel, this story does have some important reveals in it about some major characters from Mushoku Tensei, and will spoil you on those reveals if you read it too early. For that reason, a lot of people read it last, but if you're very curious about it, and it is a really good story, then the earliest you'd probably want to read it to avoid any massive spoilers and to be able to make sense of everything in it would be after finishing volume 16. Old Dragon's Tale was written after Mushoku Tensei, and it does therefore assume that people reading it already know certain things. As I said, there is other side content, but Redundancy, Jobless Oblige and Old Dragon's Tale are really the important ones, and they're very easy to get hold of translations for and to read. So that's really everything you need to know to continue reading the series. Let me know in the comments if you're planning to read the novels, or if you have any other side content you would like to recommend for Mushoku Tensei. If you're interested, I do have a similar video on how to read ahead in Re:Zero, so if you find yourself wanting to get into reading another great isekai series after Mushoku Tensei, then you can check that out too. As always, thank you to my supporters on Patreon, who are shown on screen right now, and thank you to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thank you so much for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.